So I'd like to welcome everyone to the 24th Miami Jewish Film Festival, which is one of the largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank our members, our sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout the years. My name is Merle Saferstein. I teach a class called Living and Leaving Your Legacy, and recently have been part of Melton and Moore, which is SAGE's Jewish Adult Learning Program. So I'm excited to have this virtual conversation with Mitzi Goldman, who is the director and producer of the movie A Letter for Life, which is premiered at this year's festival, and according to Mitzi, just premiered in Australia this week. So we're thrilled to have you, Mitzi. So I'd like you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into filmmaking, and what inspires your work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me in the festival and for having the film. It'll be the North American premiere, so that's very exciting. Um, I've been making documentaries for many years, actually. I started probably 35 years ago. And I've always directed my own work, and I've generally been the producer of my own work. I've also produced a lot of emerging filmmakers' documentaries as well. So I got into documentary filmmaking completely by accident. Just, I was doing a philosophy degree at university actually, and I very interested in questions of life and social issues and what makes people who they are, and how we manage society and those kind of big questions of the world, and became an assistant editor. Met a whole cohort of documentary filmmakers at that time who were all about a generation older than me, and became an assistant everything, and kind of learned very much on the job, and then started directing my own work in my 20s, and it's just been a passion of mine. I've been doing it ever since. I have to say, over the 3.5 decades of filmmaking, I've also done many other things, always closely related to documentary. So I was the head of the documentary department at the National Film School here, AFTRS, the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. And over the last decade, I've also been a co-founder, and I am the CEO of Documentary Australia Foundation, which is a foundation that we set up to really create a new funding paradigm for documentaries in this country, because we could see that the public broadcasters and the government film funding agencies were struggling to keep up with the many wonderful one-off social issue documentaries that are being made. And I think we all around the world saw over the last couple of decades really the beginnings of a shift away from social issue documentaries on the public broadcasters, a diminishing of budgets, and there was a threat really to the art form. And it's always been a passion of mine to, not just to make documentaries, but to watch documentaries, to support other documentary filmmakers. And so we've set up a foundation, and it's been terrific, because we've actually brought in close to $30 million over the last decade for documentary films, and also for programs that we run and workshops. And so I'm very immersed in the documentary world here in Australia, and I've still managed to make my own films. I think it's important to stay active as a practitioner at the same time.
Oh, thank you. That's quite a history. So tell me how you heard about Jeremy and his story, and how you became involved in filming the story.
Well, Jeremy approached me after he was diagnosed with this very rare form of cancer. He had just had open heart surgery. He says in the film that one of the most terrifying nights of his life was when he was going in for open heart surgery, and he didn't know whether he would ever see his children again. So when he woke up from that and was still alive, one of the first things he did was say, I want to speak to my children. I want to put something down so that they will really know who I am. And he called me. I'm his cousin. Jeremy's mother is my first cousin. So he was the little boy in the family. You know, he's sort of 22 years younger than me, and I knew him as a child. He's always been there. I wasn't as close to who he had become as an adult, but we were close enough for him to pick up the phone and ask me if I would make a documentary so that his kids would know him.
Thank you. And so who chose the title of the film and why that title?
Well, Jez is how he was known here. Jeremy was nicknamed Jez. So a lot of people who were close to him referred to him as Jez. And I think A Letter for Life, I wanted to add that to the title because it's not just a letter to his children that they will have for their life. It's also a letter for life. You know, it's like his kind of love for life and his, you know, outpourings of how he desperately wanted to live and, you know, what's precious about life.
So before you began to film, did you talk to him about the kinds of messages and thoughts, values, life lessons that he specifically wanted to record and include?
No, not really. I mean, it was all quite organic, I have to say. Literally, he called me and I said, of course. At the beginning, I was not thinking that this would be a public documentary film. Obviously, he was calling me because I am a documentary filmmaker, but I thought this could be something like a video diary. It could be something that he might film himself in his bedroom in the dark of night and speak into the camera and leave a record for his children, and possibly something that I didn't have to be involved with. So we started by, I just took him a camera. I gave him a little camera. I showed him how to use it. I gave him a few lessons in framing and how to be on mic and that kind of thing. And sort of left him to it. But I checked in, you know, maybe a week later, and he hadn't even picked up the camera. And he said, "Look, I just want to talk to you. You know, I don't want to be bothered with which buttons I have to push." And you know, like it was sort of not his thing. So I said, "Okay, sure." So we did a series of very long interviews, and after the first interview, which was, you know, maybe 3 hours. At the end of that, I was so moved. I was so I decided, you know, at that moment that he should speak directly into the camera so that we would have direct address, because he was speaking to his children. And I didn't want him to be distracted by speaking to me, for instance, like just speak to them. And that was so powerful. And while I was listening to him, by the end, I just thought, there's something here for all of us. I mean, he's speaking to me, he's speaking to all of us. And he's so wise. And I learned so much about how special he was. And I just, after that, he wrote a list of things because he felt he was rambling a little bit in that first interview and jumping around. And then he sent me an email, which I still have, which is just a very short list of subjects that he wanted to cover, you know, kind of, you know, childhood, schooling, you know. And I think my role in that interview process was, in a way, to stop him from just sort of charting through the chronology of his life, and go off on a, well, you know, so I had great friends at school, for instance, you know, so I was able to say, well, what does friendship mean to you? So that he could then extrapolate out from the chronology into, you know, the meaning of his life, rather than just, I did this and then I did that and then I did this and then I did that.
So it was really, so in many cases you were actually interviewing him.
I was interviewing him, yeah. I was interviewing him, but I had to keep reminding him to look into the camera, not to look at me. And there are moments where he looks at me and you can see that he's talking to, especially towards the end, the last interview that we did with him, which was just 10 days before he died. He was just talking to me.
Yeah. So I noticed that so I've done this kind of work with people where they want to do their video, some while they're still living and vibrant and totally well, which is wonderful, and then some as they're dying. And most of them, when they do it specifically for their children. And I noticed that it wasn't just him talking. There were his friends, there were the people at work. And so did he want that? Did he want them? I know he said at one point how he wanted it, I think the night he was being honored, that he wanted people, if they see his children, to make sure to let them know who he was and what he did. So was that his reason for including all of the individuals as well as just himself talking?
Yeah, look, I really wanted to include the other people, and I suggested Jeremy was very, very ill, and the illness progressed rapidly, and from diagnosis to death was only 5 months, and so and I didn't start filming until August, so really it was August to November, and there were many times when we would have an arrangement to see each other that would be cancelled because he'd been up all night or he was back in hospital or he couldn't breathe so he couldn't speak, etc. So quite quite early on I started to drive the project because I felt a sense of urgency. He did say, I want you to film at the Jewish Board of Deputies when he was stepping down. I want you to meet my boss. I want you to, he wanted me to get the full picture, but I was organising who I could bring in to speak about him in a way that he possibly wouldn't speak about himself, just to add other dimensions to him that, and still thinking really for the children, for the family, but, how you get another perspective on yourself when you speak to other people around you. So there's a bit of a combination. I knew what he wanted ultimately, and then I, drove the process to make sure we got that.
So how is it to be with him and follow him around as you did, in doing all this? How is that for you to, especially being that you were related to him, so there was a more personal relationship?
Yeah. Look, I went through so many different emotions and states of being during those 5 months, and then profoundly afterwards. Also, so we were filming in 2018. I filmed all the other people in 2019. In the second half of 2019, after I'd given them some time and a break to grieve a little bit, then we started filming. From mid 2019, then edited the film during lockdown, COVID lockdown in 2020, and delivered a short version of it to the ABC here, to ABC TV. They just took a half-hour version. And it wasn't until after all of that that the enormity of the whole experience kind of hit me. I think because I was in a sort of professional mode, I was trying to, when you've got a camera between yourself and your subject as a documentary filmmaker, there's a bit of a distance that, I was capturing and witnessing and listening and, in that mode, and didn't, there were moments where I found it unbelievable and incredible. And is he really going to die? Is this really going to happen? And all the shots in the film of the trees and the nature
I
and the,
want to talk about that. I want to
yeah.
talk about that. So finish that and we'll go to because that was actually my next question.
Yeah, so I mean that was very much about my process actually. That's the me trying to process what's going on. Is that, at the same time there's this natural world, the existential questions of, you know, is death profound or is death banal? I mean, we're all going to die. We're all, blips in the universe. We're all part of nature. We will pass. Who are we to say that we have any control over our destiny? All these kind of big questions were coming up for me while I was filming, you know, popping up like bubbles, kind of semi-unprocessed really, and I'd look at the tree across from my balcony, and it paralleled with a time here in Sydney where we had some really extreme weather events. So, the storms and the rain and that was all actually happening during that 4-month period. It wasn't kind of stock footage, which I pulled in later to illustrate something. It was all quite true. It was absolutely true to the time period in which I was filming. So, when it says August and there's a big storm, that storm was in August, and it actually was 2 weeks before he died, so it was quite, it was absolutely true to the time scale in which we were living. So I'm still processing it, to be honest with you. I feel there was an enormity to the task. I was honoured to be asked. I was humbled by the process. I feel like it's fundamentally changed me in a way that I'm still making sense of.
Yeah. So back to the nature piece, I was really struck by that. At some point in the beginning with the birds and it was beautiful and lovely. And then the first time I really noticed how metaphoric it was when I saw the branch with some dead flowers on it. And it just seemed like just setting the tone for what's happening. And then that awful thunderstorm, and then the rainbow after the funeral, it just was so parallel to his life. So it's fascinating to me that you say that was really what was going on exactly at the time. I was going to ask you, where did you get the shots, and did you just pick them up to tell the story that way? So it's really interesting that in fact
it was 100% the sort of parallel world that I was living in. And Jeremy's mother, who's my first cousin, I'm very, very close to. I adore her. And a lot of my reason for making this film, apart from, wanting to do what Jeremy asked me to do, was because of my, love for her and the, trying to imagine how I'm a mother. How could it be for a mother to come to terms with, her youngest son, possibly dying in this way, with everything that she can do or can't do to help him with this sort of sense of impotence. And during the time of filming, Jeremy stayed a lot at his parents' home because he had 2 young babies. The twins were only 6 months when he was diagnosed. And, if they had a runny nose or a little bit of a cold or anything, he was very susceptible to picking up their germs, and he couldn't afford to get sick. And so he would go and stay, and also they'd be up in the night. They were still waking up through the night, and he needed to sleep, and it was very difficult for him to be at home with the babies. And so he would stay a lot at his parents' home. And that's where I filmed the scenes with the music with his father, etc. And my cousin, Margie, Jeremy's mother, she has the most beautiful home, and she always has fresh flowers in the home. It's always, beautiful with fresh flowers and color and light. And I remember walking in to do the interviews with Jeremy there and noticing dead flowers in the vase, which was so unlike her, to have sort of 3 vases scattered around in the house with dead flowers. And I couldn't help but notice how, significant and poetic, and what a metaphor that was. Like, he's dying, the flowers, like that, I had to film those. And so I was very attuned to, I guess, the natural world during the time of making the film.
And what about the music? I mean, I know that the one piece was something that Jeremy chose. Did you talk about the kind of music that was going to be part of the movie?
Yeah, so he was very connected to me. The first interview that I did with him, when he talked about discovering classical music, and it was the first time that he became quite emotional during the interview. not when I expected him to be, but when he talked about this classical concert he went to, and he'd spoken. And so because of his connection to music, which was something that I learned through the process of interviewing him, um, I suggested, and I knew, so I guess this is where the family connection is, because I, grew up with the family, and I knew that his father was a hi-fi buff. And I have memories from my childhood going to their family home, and Richard, his father, would say, "Come and listen to this." And he had the biggest hi-fi, in the neighborhood, and he had big speakers, and he had a huge record collection. And he would always be wanting you to come and sit down with him and listen to music and listen to records. So I suggested, why don't we listen to some music together? I wanted to. I ran out of time, but I wanted to have something that Jeremy could do with each member of his family. And we started with his father because this was something that was important to both of them and something that they could do. Richard doesn't talk much, but to be able to share a moment together around music was, a very precious moment that I wanted to film. And so some of that music, the classical music, was on Jeremy's list of music that he loved, which he had sent me. And um, and then I also, later on in the edit, I got a composer who composed some of the other pieces in the music. And some of the music was, there was about a year and a half before I started editing, when I was, I guess, ruminating over how to put the film together. And I love to cook, and I would cook and I would listen to music, just as I'm cooking in the kitchen. And if I heard something that I thought, oh, that'd be really good for that scene, I was kind of trying to work it out, I'd make a note of the music. So some of the music was um, about my processing that sort of fits with the nature and that theme in the film, and some of it is close to his taste and what inspired him.
Well, it really was beautiful. The music throughout was beautiful, as was the nature. So both really struck me. So whose decision was it to take something so personal and make it public?
Mm. So again, that was also a kind of organic thing. I didn't, as I said before, I didn't set out to make a public documentary. It was something for the family. It was going to be a private piece for the family. But in the process of filming, and the more I learned about him and the more he told me, and the more I found myself really reflecting a lot about things that we often don't think about and take for granted. There are a couple of little nuggets of wisdom that he just drops, through the film.
Definitely. His life lessons, without question.
There's really quite a few of those. And I think we all need to be reminded of these things, this is kind of precious. And then I was at a documentary conference here, and I was speaking to a friend of mine who's one of the commissioning editors at the ABC, and she was asking me, what I'm doing, and I told her about this. And there's a half-hour slot on the ABC. It's a very long-running slot that's been on the ABC for many years, called Compass, which is all about religion, ethics, life, death. That's the focus of that slot on our public broadcaster. And she said, "Oh, that would just be so perfect for us. Have you thought about doing a half-hour version of it, for the Compass program?" So that was the first time that I considered, could it have a broader audience? And so I spoke to the family. This was after Jeremy had passed away. So this was in 2019. And I spoke to his mum and his brother, and I discussed it all with them. If they had not wanted it to be public, we wouldn't have gone that way. But one of the big things that Jeremy said throughout was, "I don't want to be forgotten. I just don't want to be forgotten." And the other thing that I was left with very strongly was a person's legacy. How does somebody live on beyond? How does their legacy live on? How are people not forgotten? He was an extraordinary young leader. He was the leader of the Jewish community in New South Wales. He had his sights on a political career. He had natural leadership qualities that you don't often see in they're things that actually can't be taught. I think there were quite natural qualities of a young leader, so much so that they've now named a young leadership program in his name. And I I just thought it would be in keeping with what he would want. And even though I have to say, for me, the larger project is still the legacy piece. I filmed 50 hours of material, and this is 1 hour. It's like a gateway into the legacy piece, which is 50 hours. And that 50 hours I'm still working on. It's going to be organized for the children. And it will be, all the transcripts are being printed up and will be bound in a book, and there'll be time code numbers that will correlate with the interviews. So if they're looking up, his university years, they know what part of the footage to go to. I'm making some short 5-minute vignettes, something for when they start school, age appropriate little short stories from the interviews. So he'll be in their life as they grow up. They'll have a little piece, they'll know the sound of his voice, and just little nuggets, little lessons, when they start school, when they're teenagers, around their bar mitzvah time, this sort of, and so that for me actually is the project. That's the sort of greater project. And this 1 hour and half-hour version are like gateways into that, bigger piece, which will be private, which will be for the kids and for the family. And this 1 hour is the public-facing documentary that that can offer as a sort of introduction.
Missy, I'm so happy to hear that, because in the legacy work I do, I mean, I understand that we do this for others. We think that we're doing a project for others, and in most cases we are, but often the real gift is the gift that we ourselves have by going through this life review, by doing it. So I understand, and I'm sure that for Jeremy to be able to review some of what his life was all about was probably really important for him. But I wondered about the children, and because of the material, and when he talked about, for example, being buried in the ground, and some of his fears about death and wanting to be remembered, which is universal. I mean, everyone wants to know that he or she mattered. I wondered what age would be appropriate to show this particular thing. So the fact that you are doing that, and doing, that you have 50 hours and have all those pieces for the children so that they will have their father throughout their life at different times is so beautiful and really incredibly valuable. I know that I've worked with people who are young and who have lost their children, or who are dying and are leaving their children, and who have written letters, for example, to be given to a child each year on their birthdays, for example, from the time that they die. So one man died when his daughter was 2 and his son was 4, till they were 21. Every year they'll receive a letter from their father. And so this is the same kind of thing, and it's so beautiful. And video, and hearing the voice and seeing the person and having him talk to them is just the greatest gift that you could have ever helped him to leave for them.
Well, he wanted to do the letters, but I think he wrote a couple, but he didn't get them all done. So I think that this will, and look, this 1 hour film, this film that you've seen, they may not see until they're in their 20s. It might be another 15 or 20 years before they see this one.
Right, because this one is really much more advanced than certainly for little children. So that makes a huge difference. So what was it like for you? I mean, especially as you were related. So I didn't realize that you were when I saw the video, but I'm wondering what it was like for you to share his really deeply personal, difficult moments as he faced his death. How did you do that? How did you process that? And when he talked, did you have a conversation? Were you able to talk to him about what he was feeling?
In the last interview, which was the one that we filmed just about 10 days before he died, where you can see he's unshaven, he's in the hospital. It's not talking to the children, it's really talking to me. That interview was, very much a conversation. And it was a very long, rambling, for a few hours, we sat there, we took breaks, we came back, I guess he knew it was going to be the final interview, the final, but it wasn't, and there was a lot of repetition and there were lots of things that he told me before. And there are a lot of questions. He knew my mother. I think we started to talk about, the time when my mother died, and I was by her side then, and what that was like. And, so he also had questions about what will it be like in the end? How was she? How did she, so it was a conversation that was very much two ways. You just see a very small piece of that in the film. He was very unguarded at that time. He was just saying whatever, he wasn't trying to make anybody feel comfortable, or he wasn't trying to say the right thing or trying to be positive or trying to be anything. He was just really, really letting it out. And I think that I felt that this was a really important moment, and I had been trying for 2 weeks because I had seen him at that birthday party with the children. And then he was very, very sick there. And then I think even the next day he went into hospital, and I had been trying to see him for 2 weeks, and he was just too sick, too sick, too sick. And so finally he said, "Come today." And so I just stopped everything and went. And I just, thought, this is a little window, and it's now, and now is when he wants to speak about this and just say whatever. And I think that and I've since spoken quite a lot with his mother and his brother and sister and his wife, that they were not able to really do that for him. They were not able to hear that without feeling an enormous amount of pain. His mother to some extent, I think, but they were in the, how do I make you comfortable? How do I make you, what can I do for the children? How can I help? You'll be all right. But I suppose, even though I was related to him, I was that one step removed.
Right.
I wasn't on the front line like his wife and his mother and I mean, he died, his mother and his wife were both on the bed when he died. I mean, his mother, Margie, brought him into the world and took him out. Like, she was not the one that could sit there and listen to his thoughts about being buried. That would be like a, stab in the heart. So I was just that little bit removed, and maybe because of my training as a documentary filmmaker, and because of my, I could put my professional hat on and push away the, family and just be there as a professional. I wouldn't be able to do that, with my own child or part, but I could do it in this instance. And, I think it served, I think it was helpful for him. I think it was cathartic for him.
I'm sure it was. And I think that in some ways he probably would want to protect his mother, his wife, his brother, sister, whatever. But you were just that one step away, like you said, where he was able to say the things that really needed to be said. And what a gift to be able to hear that, Mitzi, to be able to give him the opportunity to have said the things he said, and to express his fears, and to let him ask the questions that, probably so many of us, as we're approaching death, want to know. And so really the gift was incredible that you gave him. And I hope that
Well, I think also it was a very particular relationship because we were related. There was a trust there. So I think if he was just a documentary subject and I was just a documentary filmmaker, there wouldn't have been that kind of lifetime of trust in a way for him to be able to open up. But at the same time, it wasn't so close that it was, just too painful to go there. And what I also really sensed that he had the desire to speak out loud what was going on in his head in the dark of night, to put that out there, not just think at night when you can't sleep about being buried, but to be able to actually talk about what will it be like in the end, and what was it like for your mother in the end, and what, like to actually voice those things kind of allows them in a way to float off somehow. So,
Right. Absolutely.
mm.
So what did you learn from Jeremy and from the experience of filming this that might lead you to live your life differently? Or did you learn anything that would?
That's a really great question, and that is such an important question, and that is I think that's the central question of the film.
I
You
do
know,
too.
I mean, I only really came to that maybe during the edit and towards the finishing of the film. And actually releasing the film to audiences continues that process of working out what is this all for? What have I learned? What does it mean? Um, on one level, there are the obvious things, the cliches, if you like, that you hear all the time, that be present, live every day as though it's your last. It's the small things in life. It's the being able to walk in the park or have a swim in the ocean. I mean, you imagine if you're given you've got 5 months to live, what do you want to do? And you think, oh, I want to travel, or I want to go bungee jumping, or I want, actually, that's not really what he wanted to do. It's not really what people want to do. They want to live those precious final times with the people who love them and who they love. And so I think for me, there've been certain things that I constantly return to, like don't sweat the small stuff, um, be really present, don't stress about, what you have no control over, run your own race. How can I make every day count? Like, what I think it's profoundly affected me in so many ways, that what can I do in the time that I have left on this planet? We never know when our time is going to run out. How can I make that time the most meaningful, the most purposeful? These are things that we just have to remind ourselves of when we get caught up in the stress of everyday life, and when we start sweating the small stuff, to start thinking, like, really, does this really matter? Like, is anyone dying here? Those sorts of things. Yeah, so definitely that. And then there were, I think it's also about how to really be there for people, and the importance of listening. And I've always known that, but I I felt it in a very intense way, not just in a superficial way, to really deeply listen. And you don't have to answer, and you don't have to come up with solutions, and you don't have to say anything, but to just be really present and listening is in itself of great help and of value. So those kinds of things. And I think also last night something that came up in the discussion here was that people are awkward, when it comes to people amongst them who are dying or grieving. What do you say? What do you say to them? They almost want to cross the street, and avoid, because they don't know what to say, because they're really uncomfortable. And we talked a lot about that last night, that we had someone on the panel who's from an organization here called the Groundswell Project, which is a not-for-profit organization which is really all about creating social and cultural change around conversations about death and dying, and how to kind of normalize it, like how to be literate in, and she was saying on the panel, you can even just say to people, I don't know what to say.
Right. Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know, But to acknowledge, just to acknowledge, you know.
Just to be there, just to hold a hand. So in the legacy classes and the work that I do, what I've come to realize is that how we live our life is our legacy. So basically, regardless of what we leave behind, the legacy really is people are watching us and they are learning from us. And if we leave nothing, who we were as human beings on this earth is really becomes our legacy. So that's, I think that that's such an important thing to keep in mind, because how you're living today is really what people are going to remember. I was once interviewed and someone asked me how I wanted to be remembered, and I had a whole answer. I was very clear about exactly what I wanted. And then one of my friends in one of the writing groups that I facilitate was dying. And I went to visit her and I said to her, Maria, how do you want to be remembered? And she looked at me, she thought for a few minutes and she said, Merle, I'm going to remember, you're going to remember me the way you remember me. It doesn't matter how I want to be remembered. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense, because we are who we are. And, we can think that, but unless we live our life in that way, it doesn't necessarily happen. So I think that's really important. So this is a difficult movie to watch for some. You talk about people being uncomfortable with death, and this is certainly not an easy movie for a lot of people, a film for a lot of people to watch. So I'm curious to know how you market it, or how you get it out there and people can embrace it without being uncomfortable with the subject matter.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mel. Maybe you can help me with that. I'm really not sure.
Maybe we'll talk about it after.
I've had people say to me, I can't go there. I can't watch it. I just can't. It's too, and I respect that. That's fine. I don't want to trigger anything here. And also, many people, after it was screened on the ABC here in Australia, the half hour, where over 450,000 people watched it on air, so it had quite a broad audience. There was a lot of comments on the Facebook page, etc., that was saying, it's tough, it's sad, but it's inspiring. There are so many lessons here. So I think that, it's important to highlight that there is something incredibly inspirational in the way that he had the foresight and in what he has to tell us. And that's what was left for me. And I feel when I watched the film, when I watched it last night with this audience, mostly of people who didn't know him, and I see them responding and bringing their own life experiences to the film, and I realized that actually this is his legacy. As you say, it's not how he wanted to be remembered, but this is his legacy. Is the film will live on a lot longer, than he has, and will do its work out there in the world, and I think will be of help to people. And I think that it is in the space in which you're working. I could see the conversation last night being so powerful with Jessie Williams, who runs the Groundswell Project here, in helping people understand how to live life better, how to support those around them who, have loved ones who are dying, how to grieve, how, all those things. So I think it's definitely in that niche, which is not such a small niche, many people are dying and will die. And if you're open to, I guess you have to have a bit of a more existential kind of interest. But I'm assuming it'll be in that space.
Yeah, well, it's so valuable for so many reasons. One of the things that I feel is, while it's really important to do this work at the end of our lives, I think it's also equally as important to do it when we're not dying, when we aren't actively dying. So I encourage the people in my classes to write their ethical wills now, don't wait. And I've sat at the bedside of many people who are dying and done the sacred work as you did with Jeremy. But I think that a greater gift, well, not a greater, but a different kind of gift, is to do it while we're living, to look at our lives, to think about the life lessons and our values and beliefs and the things we want to pass along, and do them now while we can. So just the thought is something that I really think is so important. So I'm
And
wondering,
the things I just wanted to mention too, what made this one of the things that I learned that I didn't mention before is that when you're with older people who are dying, and I have been with parents with elderly people, it's completely different. It was a completely different thing. When you're with a young person who just wants to live, he had such a laser sharp focus on living and what life means, and it was a very acute, sharp experience, which was quite different from somebody who's very elderly and who's had enough, who's ready to go.
right. Oh, I think that's really true. I worked with a hospice patient who was 49. She had a 19-year-old son, and she wanted to do a video to leave for her son. And she was waiting for the hospice organization to bring a videographer. And I said to her, and her husband was sitting right across, and I said, you don't have to wait. He had his iPad on his lap. I said, you can do it yourself right now, just start. And so we talked for 2 hours, and I kind of gave them direction in terms of the kinds of things that she might want to talk about. I left. They talked for 4 hours. She videotaped. The next day, she went into a coma and died that night. And I thought to myself, it's never too soon. You just never know.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Anything else that you think as viewers you'd like us to know about the experience, or any anecdotes that you want to leave us with before we conclude?
Look, I think it's worth mentioning also that he had such a wicked sense of humour, and he was very, he had what his brother called real gallows humour. So he was always making jokes about, in that uncomfortable space. There's one moment when we're in the car, and he said, I was going to make a joke about burial spaces, but that'd make people feel uncomfortable. But there's a lightness of touch in the way he went through life, and he had I guess this is the other thing that I think is probably relevant to audiences at a Jewish film festival, is that he was very driven by social cohesion and reaching across the aisle and interfaith dialogue, and the importance of communities of different backgrounds and different faiths being able to talk to each other and find common ground. And I think that was without him really articulating this until he was at the end, I think that drove his direction and his choices in life. And I think that's something the world needs. It's like the combination of those two things. Let's reach across the aisle and speak to people who come from different backgrounds and understand that we're all human in the end. We're all facing the same kinds of struggles, and let's have a kind of lightness of touch as we tiptoe through this precious time that we have. So yeah, just
So I want to thank you personally, because watching the film has really left me with so many thoughts, and just to have the opportunity to have known him in this way, what a beautiful spirit. And so for me personally, I have not stopped thinking about it. I watched it a few times already, and I just keep thinking about him and the impact he made on his life, and will continue to make as a result of you having done this film. So personally, on a personal level, I thank you. I think that your audiences will gain a tremendous amount by watching this, and hopefully give them a lot of food for thought about their own life, how they're living it, and what their legacy will be as well. So I thank you for that. And certainly we thank all the members, the sponsors, the community partners, the volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially thanks to the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education and for Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support. Thank you, Mitzi.
Thank you.
And it's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.